there are many sides of arguments, and my presentation will basically focus on the perspective from the African continent and whether agroecological farming can address issues related to food security. I'll look at my presentation will basically give a highlight of the status of agriculture in Africa, and when we're talking about food security, what are the fundamental things we need to look at from the African perspective, what is important and what is less important, because sometimes what we call important may be less important depending on the context in which you are saying so. The other thing which is important, which we shall also have a highlight, is you cannot link food security to poverty in Africa, and you cannot address food security without addressing poverty, because somehow the root causes of food security are anchored in the poverty situation that most of the population in Africa are living in. So if you are providing any solution to address food security, you must very strongly think about addressing poverty. And poverty is more than just food. There are so many other aspects that are very critical. So we shall have a highlight at that. And then we'll look at how agroecological farming methods, specifically organic farming, has been able to contribute enormously in addressing food security in East Africa. And also some few thoughts on what I think we need to do to focus on the future. How do we move forward if we are to go ahead in this subject? This is a standard definition. I mean, when we talk about food security, there is a lot of misunderstanding. And Laura was talking about the 9 billion narrative. When you talk about food security, most people think about increasing food production. And as long as you increase food production, that will address food security. And this is the kind of notion which has been packaged and is being sold to many African countries. As that if you work on the increase in food production, then you are going to address food security. And unfortunately, most of our governments are actually singing the same song. And the other important bit is that actually this song, which is being sung, is actually not bringing results. So something is fundamentally wrong, either on the analysis of the problem or on the appropriateness of the solution. And we need to look at both. When you talk about food security, it's defined as a condition where all people at all times have physical and economic access. And many times we tend to address the physical and we forget the economic access. And the economic access is anchored in poverty. So we have one angle which is very easy to solve, and another angle which we don't even want to think about, which actually keeps us failing to deliver the results. So I wanted us to have from the beginning to have that understanding, because it's the basis for my presentation. Just as a quick highlight on agriculture on the continent of Africa. And agriculture, where we are talking about both primary production and trade, is the primary activity for more than 60% of the population in Africa. So any investment which is not in agriculture, or which does not put agriculture into consideration, actually is targeting wrongly on Africa, because the primary livelihoods of the biggest part of the population is on agriculture. And for most countries, it provides more than 30% of the GDP, especially sub-Saharan Africa. And it's the main export, because we're talking about income, and it's for most African countries, it's the main export product. So it means it does not only touch on the livelihoods of the individual population, but also on the economies in totality. So it's very, very important. The other thing which is also a fact is that when you're talking about farmers, the majority of farmers in Africa are actually subsistence farmers. They work on very small family farms, and so that's the biggest population of that is engaged in agriculture. And in sub-Saharan Africa, we have more than 95% of the farming community actually using less than 5 hectares in active production. So, in terms of scale, those are the majority, and those are the people we are talking about. When you look at my country, Uganda, we have 70% of the entire population actually are directly involved in agriculture, and over 95% of this farming this population are actually smallholder farmers, and the farming on less than 3 hectares. So they are only using, on average, at maximum 3 hectares of cultivated land for their production. So when we're talking about solutions and all these problems, we need to have that context very, very clear. Pablo rightly gave us that different solutions will need to be contextualized, because without contextualizing them, they may not effectively work in some areas. But it's also a known fact that poverty levels in Africa is still a very big challenge, and it's still high and unacceptable. And its average is about 30% in most countries. 30% of the population are still living in poverty, and unfortunately, the majority of these are in the rural areas. And in Africa, when you talk about rural areas, you're talking about farmers. So it's the main territory for farmers. So which means the majority of people who are poor are actually farmers. And that's the simplest meaning. Because if the majority of the people who are poor in the rural areas, and the 95% of the people in the rural areas are farmers, then it means the farmers represent the population with the highest poverty levels. And that's also a concern. So it means the rural people, the rural population in Africa, who are mainly smallholder farmers, are the most affected by poverty. And because poverty is linked to food insecurity, they are also the most vulnerable to food insecurity. And that's the context we need to look at. Of course, many solutions have been proposed, and the conventional wisdom is that in order for us to address food insecurity, we need to double food production or even triple. And in order to do this, we need to modernize agriculture. There's a lot of talks in most of our African countries about modernizing agriculture. And the whole contextualization of what's modernizing is anchored very strongly on the industrial model. And this is what most governments are investing in, and of course with a lot of support also from the government partners. And that's why I mentioned that when it comes to administering solutions which can work, our governments are the first culprits. Because living with the populations, they should be able to analyze the problems much more effectively. So that's the situation. So the technological progress we have seen in the last past 50 years have not been able to solve the problems of hunger and poverty in most African countries. And what we see is actually in some areas, the population are actually becoming more and more vulnerable. So we need to reflect on the solutions. Should we increase more food production? Should we transport more food from some parts of the world where there is access to where there is no food? The issues of preferences come in. Which type of, in Uganda, for example, there are times when you have a lot of food in some parts of the country, and when in the other parts of the country there's not enough food, and people are going hungry. And it's not that we are too big a country that food can't be transported, but preferences. In the central part of the country where I come from, the main food products eaten are fruits, a lot of fruits, a lot of matoke. Matoke, I don't know the matoke, it's the cooking type of banana. We have the largest per capita consumption of bananas in general in the world. But we don't not about this type of banana, the dessert banana, but the cooking banana. And for the people in the central region of Uganda, if you have not brought that matoke, you have not brought food on the table. And when you go to the northern part of Uganda, in the dry areas, in the Karamoja, which is mainly pastoralists, they want grains, millet. And if you have not provided millet, however much you have a lot of matoke in the central, and there is no food in the, you cannot give them matoke. They don't understand that. So we need to understand that there is a lot of, it's complex. It's not just a quick solution that can solve these complexities and diversity, even within one country. And so the solutions need to be realistic to the problem, not imagined, not theoretical. So reduction of poverty and food insecurity for smallholder rural populations require focus on locally adapted farming systems. If you're in central Uganda, you need to understand what kind of food they eat. If you are in northern part of Uganda, you need to understand. And the farming system needs to address those specific situations. Local resources, diversification of crops. An average farm, an average smallholder farm in Uganda has about 30 different crops. 30 different crops, on average. And there are so many reasons why that is so. And when you ask the farmers, they will give you so many reasons. One is security. Because one crop fails, then, because most of the farming in Uganda is, and indeed in most African countries, is not irrigated production. It's rain-fed. So everything depends on rain. Even when we have a lot of water which could be irrigated, which could be used for irrigation. The farming systems presuppose that most farmers will depend on rain to grow their production. The other thing is that water management is critical. And the reason why farmers will tell you why they grow a variety of crops is water management, because they want to transcend from the dry season to the next rain, because we have 2 rain seasons and there's a dry spell in the middle. And the different crops have different purposes. And some are for conservation and the retaining of water for at least 1 month into the soil, so that the crops can continue using it through that. And that's how they secure their production and secure their future and their food security. The other thing which is critical is the income generation through access to markets. I wanted to look at farmers, or smaller farmers in particular, put them in your perspective, our own perspective. First of all, they depend their livelihood entirely on farming. And livelihood is not about food only. Livelihood is about the food, yes, very good. It's also about other social aspects. It's about education, taking their children to school. It's about health, seeking medical attention. And all these are not free services in Africa. The family have to pay for these services. So which means more than just having food on the table, they also need to have an income. And because they are farmers and they entirely live on farming, the income must come from the family. So market access is critical. Otherwise, they cannot leave the other part of their livelihood. They cannot take their children to school. They cannot pay for health services. They cannot build a better house. They cannot buy a bicycle, a motorcycle. They rarely talk about vehicles, but the Israelis talk about motorcycles. But that's very important for their transportation. So they cannot do that if they don't have an income. And income is not coming from their family. So if you're talking about what has been found is that actually income plays a very, very critical role in addressing food security in homes than actually increasing just food production. And that's a very interesting perspective. So when we're talking about food security at the households, at the farmers, it's a very complex. It's very complex. Their needs, the needs of the farmers are as complex as our needs. But every time we talk about addressing food security, the mind and all goes on how do we bring food on the table. And there are also some interesting discoveries which have been made. And that when we talk about solutions, the solution is to improve food production must go hand in hand with raising income, as I mentioned earlier. But more than that, for smallholder farmers, they need to be low cost, otherwise they will be out of target. They need to be local available, otherwise access issues will become big issues. And they should be based on technologies which can take advantage of the local resources. Otherwise, whatever, and that's why the industrial model has failed to take off in most of the African countries. Because it does not take these aspects. And these are the aspects which define the environment in which the smaller farmers are living in. So, that's very, very important. And there was a study which was carried out by the International Food Policy Research Institute in Uganda. And the study found that 60% of the households in rural areas in Uganda purchase more food by value than they actually sell. I don't know that you get this, the meaning of this. These are farmers, they grow food. And Uganda is known as the food basket for East Africa. But when you go to the individual household, they actually spend more money to buy food than what they get from than the money they get from selling their food product. And that exactly explains the cycle of poverty. And what do they buy when you talk about spending more money? Because food is not the cassava or the maize or the matoke, in the case of the central part of Uganda, or the millet. That's not food alone. Because every time we're talking about increasing yield, we're talking about increasing yield per hectare of any of those. But food is more than just that. Food is also cooking oil, it's also salt, it's also sugar. Farmers don't grow all this. They don't grow sugar, they don't grow salt, they don't grow cooking oil. Many who don't have rice, they don't have also, they have to buy milk. Now, the value of these small things farmers buy is more than the income they get from selling their cassava or their maize which they have grown on the farm. So if you are talking about increasing yield per hectare, it's not solving the other problem. So it means if there is no a very defined market which we are farmers, because most of the people are farmers anyway, so they are all farmers. So if they are all farmers, they must sell what they grow somewhere to get income which they can use to buy these other things. Otherwise, if they are growing 2 hectares and what they get as income is not able to even cover the things they buy out, and also pay for education for their children, and also pay for the health services, then simple economics, they are actually, and this leads to a lot of demotivation. There is no incentive to farm anymore, and this means that with time, the production is going to go down. And that's what happens. Because farmers cannot make a living. Even when they grow 5 acres, if they don't have a good market where they're going to sell their products to, because they can only eat, a household, they can only eat food which is equivalent to 1 acre or 2 acres a year. So if they grew about 3 hectares, then what they do with the other 3? So if you tell them to increase production 5 hectares, what they do with the other 3 or 4 hectares. So solutions must be taken collectively, not just looking at increasing production. And we have already seen in the previous presentation that actually there is a lot of food, but something's wrong. Why is this food not ending up and solving their hunger issues? And just recently, the government of Uganda has recognized, I have told you already that the typical notion from most governments in Africa has been that we need to increase food production, and we need to increase food production based on the industrial model, because that's what has worked in Europe and has worked in all the developed countries, so we should apply that to the work. But recently, the government of Uganda was revising the investment plan, the Agricultural Development Investment Plan, and they recognized that actually, if we are talking about increasing agriculture productivity, we should focus more on addressing income generation. And the ability of agriculture to address and generate income for the poor is particularly for women. We see women are the most sexually involved in agriculture. That it's more important for addressing food security than just increasing the food supplies. If agriculture does not address the income issue, it's a wrong solution for the rural population in the context and circumstances they are living in. And this is very, very important. And it emphasizes the fact that we should not carry these aspects in isolation. Income generation is critical, and without income generation, the farmers are stuck in poverty, and they are demotivated. They can't even increase production. They have enough food, but they don't have a complete food in terms of all the aspects of food which they take in for their consumption. And the issue of income, agriculture addressing income, being critical for food security is also concurs very well with the findings from some of the projects here in Uganda and Tanzania, from the Cedar Family Export Promotion for Organic Products, a proper project, where those farmers in the rural areas who were already linked to organic markets were also the ones who were found the most food secure. So those farmers who have an income were also found the most food secure compared to their counterparts, which means they can buy the other aspects of food very easily, which their counterparts who have no access to markets, who have no linkage to any income generation, and who are primarily involved just in producing the food, are not able to realize. So, against this background, what we have discovered in most of the emerging countries is that for one, the resources that we use for farming must be based on the local resources. The best solution will be those which will provide solutions based on the local resources. Because most of the farming communities in Africa still rely on the traditional farming practices. Whatever solution you prescribe must start from there and build on those traditional farming practices. When a solution proposes large investment in external inputs, then it becomes very, very difficult to implement. And so when you look at, for example, in Uganda, the national average for using synthetic fertilizers is about 1 kilogram per hectare per year. So most farmers are not really using external input. They are using most of the traditional farming practices to manage and improve fertility of the soils. And that's why most farmers in Uganda, for example, call themselves organic by default because they think organic is closer to what they are doing. They may have a few areas where they need to improve, but it's closer to what they understand. So it's easier for them to pick up whichever innovations, whichever improvements you would like to propose, because it starts from what they know. It starts from what they understand. And that's why agro-ecological farming practices are more popular, and they're becoming more and more adopted by smaller farmers. And we are seeing quite increasing adoption of organic farming by smaller farmers for the same reasons. Because one, it's very suitable and it's compatible with most of the traditional farming practices. It also takes use of most of the knowledge they have, which has been handed over from generation to generation by their ancestors. And for most farmers, because farmers are very good at risk calculation, they need not use sophisticated modeling, but they are very clever in terms of calculating risks. And to them, the agro-ecological farming practices are low risk to them. So in terms of how much they put in and how much they can lose or how much they can gain, it's easier to adopt it, given the resource concept that they live in. And also in terms of market entry, it's low risk. If we are talking about exports, it's much easier to export organic products than it is to export conventional, for example, fruits and vegetables from Africa to Europe. Because the requirements on pesticide residue testing are so high that most of the countries, I remember in Uganda in about 1997, we used to have a lot of fruits and vegetables exported, conventional. And in the last 15, 20 years, some of the products the exports have gone down to almost zero. And in some products like the pineapples, we used to export a lot of pineapples. The only exports now available from Uganda are organic pineapples. You can't have any conventional pineapple export from Uganda. And the reasons are basic. The requirements of compliance to conventional market requirements are very expensive, very rigorous, and most of the smaller farmers can't. So, to them, organic is very risky because, first of all, even when you come and check and test, you'll find that their farming practices are closer to what is expected in the organic standards in the markets where the products are going. And it also saves them from the lot of testings for pesticides and all these other things which are requirements in the convention. So for them, as a decision, it's low risk, and that becomes more adopted. I mean, it's adapted to their. But also, the other advantage is that there is increasing demand for organic products, and the good price that farmers are able to get from the increasing interest for organic products is important in improving incomes, especially in the rural areas where there are not many options for income generation. I just want to show some of these pictures, but just to look at sometimes you tend to think that smaller farmers have no innovation, or they don't think about what they do, but which is not correct. This is one of the farms in the small one farm, I think it's about one acre. It's less than a hectare. And if you look at the plants, maybe the photo is not very clear. There are pineapples, are younger pineapple plants. In the middle, they mulch. And besides the rows, on both sides, there's a leguminous plant, which they plant along, and the sequence continues up the rest of the acre. And when I asked the farmer, why do they do that? And this was the explanation. They have not gone to school. They can't read, they can't write. That when we put these are maize plants, the water, when it rains, the soils can keep water in the soil for more than 30 days. In Uganda, we don't normally have, you cannot have more than 30 days without rain. That's the maximum we get, even in what we call the dry season. The dry season can last for 3 months or 2 months, but during those dry seasons, you can have, every month you can have 2 showers in the dry season. Now, by mulching, it can keep water in the soil. They even know the number of days it can keep water in the soil, for about 30 days, which is already enough, because within 30 days you have at least 1 shower. And then the other thing is that the plant on the other side of the row is fixes nitrogen. For them, they know that it adds fertility to the soil. Of course, it's a leguminous plant. Now, whichever explanation they give, it may not be explained in the scientific sense, but they know that it makes sense to plant that, and that improves the soil, and that improves their pineapple production. And today in Uganda, the highest productivity in pineapples is on organic farms, not on conventional farms. There are some farms that are conventional. They use a lot of all the inputs, but the known highest production comes of tons per hectare is on organic farms. So we need to think that and understand that farmers have a lot of innovation, and we need to start working from their innovation and their understanding of the local environment to build the systems which are more resilient, which are more sustainable within the context. This is one of the farms. Now, This farm is a cooperative of farmers. They grow pineapple and banana. And this is the explanation. Now when you look at, these are pineapples, there is a bit of bush. And the other side are bananas. The other side, you can't see them, but the other side of the, because the bush is a bit, are bananas. And the farmer's explanation in this cooperative are selling pineapple, they're exporting it and they're selling it to Germany, organic pineapples, is that the middle, the kind of bush in the middle, is for trapping pests, is for multiplying the good insects, which will predate on those insects which come and attack pineapples. And the same for the other side of the bananas. So they deliberately, in their wisdom, leave, and they have what I call a bylaw within the community. You cannot touch that bush. You cannot, and all members know that. That's important for them to sustain. Now, whichever scientific form that's their wisdom, that's their explanation. And these are some of the farmers from the same group explaining how they harvest their pineapples. This lady already harvested pineapples. And this is where they sell their pineapples. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that the whole chain must be complete. While we are addressing production issues, we must also address the marketing. If whatever initiative we are bringing to the farmers must work. So the same group, this is where they collect, and if you see the line, they are all lining up. Each one is lining up against his fruits. This is where they collect, pack their pineapples, and sell to the company which is finally transports them and they export them. This is the banana from the other side of the farm which we are not able to see. And then these are the pineapples now packed. And the farmers will explain to you the whole process of where their product goes through. They have never gone to Germany, but they know how their product, and that's important for their motivation. And what happens is that every week, the buyer on the other side comes with because the product attached to the individual smallholder farm, comes with a report on how each farmer was fared in that week's export in terms of the quality of the product. And they are very proud of this. And this gives them motivation, even to compete among themselves to make improvements. So income is very, very critical in motivating to adopt whatever farming practices we are talking about smallholder farmers. And one of the things which came out in one of the studies is that why agro-ecological systems are very they are very popular among smallholder farmers, and is that when we analyze how the profits are distributed among the chain, from the smallholder farmer groups that are supplied to the companies and then to the final when they exported it, 37% of the premium in the organic chain actually goes to the farmers. I talk about the profit. 37% go to the farmers. And in Uganda, I'm giving an example in Uganda, 16% on food costs, 18% on extra handling, because in organic you have to fulfill extra handling requirements, certification. You have to put in place a system before you can be certified. That's extra handling requirements brought about by organic certification. And then the companies which are exporting the products from these smaller farmers groups are actually paying 14% of the entire margin, and then 15% of certification. Now, the point I want to show here is that because a bigger percentage of this profit is retained by the farmers, there is very high motivation by the farmers to even expand their production. We have had cases where farmers who started with half an acre, which is 0.8 of a hectare, have been able to expand up to 15 acres. And every year, because of the motivation, they go on adding, because they feel their livelihood is being addressed. Income, they are able to take their children to school, they are able to, so they invest more in more production. And they listen to every advice you are giving them in terms of improvement in the production system. So, that's my last slide. So what needs to be done? I think having seen the challenges and the realities that smaller farmers face and work in, one of the things which is very critical when you talk about smaller farmers is that we need to build the collective abilities of smaller farmers. Because as individuals, they can hardly access most of the services. So we need to mobilize farmers, build the associations, because as a group or collectively, they can address the services, but they can also make decisions on what kind of improvements they can make their farming systems. And then one thing which is a bit worrying is that the kind of investment in agriculture in most of the developing countries is going down, and that's worrying. Not from the governments, but also not from the development assistance. The trend in the last 3 years is that most of the development assistance and most of the government is shifting away from agriculture to more issues like policy issues, and unfortunately this cannot address the limitations of the Constituents Act on the grassroots level. So that's quite a worrying trend. So there is need for more investment at the grassroots in improving the production systems, but also in adding value, processing, and the establishment of market infrastructure. If we are talking about the transition of these farmers to more food secure situations. And then the other thing is that research is still very limiting in Africa, especially in organic-friendly technologies, because there are a lot of technologies which are coming up at smaller farmers level, but these need to be studied, they need to be improved, they need to be packaged, and this is where research comes in as being very critical in improving the agro-ecological systems which farmers are implementing at the farm level. Without research coming to play, then it becomes very difficult for these to be multiplied, replicated, even in other similar environments. So, by strengthening the farm organization, by investing further in the production at the farms, but also in the value addition, market infrastructure, and by strategically investing in research in those technologies which are based on the realities at the farmers level, we can make all the leap we would like to see in terms of addressing food security and the income, and actually addressing poverty for the smaller farmers in most of the African countries. Thank you very much.